for some of you is not necessarily something that you're as familiar with as um, the last couple of things we've looked at, which are music and television and film. But I think it's actually safe to say that of all the of those three things, music, which we talked primarily popular music, but we also included in that Broadway and um, other genres, but mainly pop music and rock and as Alan pointed out, we didn't do enough classical, but we talked about those areas, and we I think I made a pretty clear case that Jews have had a leading role in rock and pop music over the last 60, 70 years. But when we looked at film and television and we looked at the Jews who started Hollywood, and I showed you that basically every major studio was started by Jewish people. Tonight, when we talk about the comic book, and we're also going to be talking about graphic novels because that's actually a huge part of this genre. You can actually make the argument that Jews have dominated this part of media more than any other part, in the sense that, like, when we talk about Hollywood, yeah, the studios were all started and run by Jewish folks, but a lot of the actors, and some of the actors were Jewish. We talked about Paul Mooney and some of the stars from the very beginning, Al Jolson, and all the way through television. But there were a lot of actors, a lot of people creating content that were not Jewish. When it comes to comic books, you can make the argument that the industry, the
Rabbi,
owners of the companies, and the creators, the content creators, were so disproportionately Jewish that that there might be no area of the media that has been more affected and to some extent created by Jews than the comic book industry. Now, what's of course interesting is that it in our lifetime, uh, there has been a very interesting crossover because, of course, in the films and television, uh, we've seen comic books become we've seen them become dominated by comic books, and so the creations of these Jewish content creators to some extent has affected these other areas, especially television and film, especially film. Um,
Rabbi, real
yeah,
quick. Yeah,
yeah.
the Strobo Center has
I'm going to show it. I promise you.
okay,
Oh
okay,
no!
okay.
When we get to that, please show that because you actually were there. I want to see if I can put this up. Uh, Only because I found this and it really harkens back to what we looked at last time, and it's something I referred to. I referred to this actually a couple years ago in a High Holiday sermon about Jews and Jew face on television, but
Rabbi, can I interrupt you?
yeah, sure. Oh,
Yeah.
you're gonna please, yeah. I want you to be. You started, but I said I wanted everyone to come on, and we're about to start. So please, yes, thanks, Mike. Please, because we're
Uh,
dedicating today to somebody special.
Dedicated to her name is Shirley Remotely. She passed away on Friday. She was 91. I've known the family for 55 years. She was honestly a second mom to me. When I was younger, I still am picky eater, but when I was younger, um, I wouldn't eat anything. And we'd go camping. And she told me, said, Mike, I'll make you something you like, but you have to try what we're eating. She never had to make me something I like because I always ate what they made.
She made you.
Um, she pushed me. Um, that family is very special to me. I'm still friends. Gary, the youngest son, we've been friends since we were 12 years old. Um, so, many Passovers we spent and Fourth of July's. We had Super Bowl parties every year. It was a sad day. Anyways, let's keep
Thank you
going.
for yeah, thank
If
you for
I if
dedicating it to her today. What we learned.
Yeah,
If I can get my comment in as well.
Yeah.
Spending 50 years in New England with schools like Harvard and MIT, spitting distance from where we lived. It was always interesting waiting for the Nobel Prize to be announced and find out how many locals from Boston and Cambridge and whatever had won Nobel Prizes. I was always very well aware of how many Nobel Prize went to Jews. It's not given by the Arab League. It's given by a
Yeah.
bunch of Norwegians who
I
seem to
know.
be pretty level at these sort of things. So I ran some statistics yesterday, which you can do with AI nowadays. Us Jews occupy 2/10, 0.2% of the world's population. However, we have won, are you ready for the number?
Yeah.
22% of the Nobel Prizes across all kinds of categories. So 0.2% of the world's population has clearly outperformed in Nobel, and I've got multiple degrees in engineering and mathematics, but that ratio just staggers me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that is true. And so yeah, when we talk about that now, that being said, and again, disproportionate is one thing, but today I want to tell you that what's happened, and I was actually looking for a video that just kind of floated across. I can't get it on the computer. I can't get it up, and it probably wouldn't play anyways. But there's a really interesting clip going back to what we studied before, though, which is this issue of that Sarah Silverman has been very upfront about, which is considering that Jews have dominated Hollywood, we have not really done a great job of, especially when it comes to Jewish women, um, um, done a great job of making sure that Jewish women are being portrayed on television, especially with by Jews, and also the fact that a lot of the Jewish women characters are not pleasant characters, and so she's actually one of those people that that's made those made this. Let me just see if I can. Maybe I found it, but like I said, I don't know if that I could get it to play properly. It was on Instagram, and she made the point about specifically, and this was a few years ago, about the fact that on Friends, the women that were supposed to be Jewish were played by Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox, and that they wouldn't hire somebody like her because she was too Jewish, is what her point was. Anyways, um, but back to what we're talking about today, which is the comic books, and the graphic, this medium. This is not one of those things where it's a disproportionate amount, where you could say in engineering or science or in the in the fields of again, some of the fields where there's just a disproportionate, or politics, or with business. The comic book industry doesn't exist without Jews, and that's not an overstatement of the situation. So, again, what's exciting about this, of course, is that this is one of those examples of um, what we're going to talk about today is actually something that Philip was just about to share, and I'm going to just share it up here on the screen so you can see it. You can actually go this week. Well, not everybody, but if you're in Los Angeles anytime soon, so the Schulmans wouldn't necessarily be able to see this, but this is Inventing America, the Comic Book Revolution, which is going to be going on for another, well, as you can see, it's another 6 months or so. This will be going on. But Philip, do you want to say a little bit about what you thought about this exhibit? You
No,
obviously went and you've got the
I
catalog.
no, I haven't been there yet.
Oh,
I picked up the catalog because Saturday night I was at Skirball for a Los Angeles County Bar family law function, and when I was walking in, they had these flyers, and I went, "Oh, what is this?" And I picked it up, and I'm definitely going. It looks fascinating.
I went, but I only saw part of it because I was with some friends from New Jersey who like did not have a lot of patience, but the part I saw was great.
Well, I will say that we're going to cover. I'm not 100% like. It's definitely good. Don't get me wrong, but there's things that we're going to talk about here that I don't think they really presented front and center. First of all, it's kind of cool. They have Linda Carter here as Wonder Woman, which is interesting because the Wonder Woman is one of the few characters was not created by a Jewish author or artist. Interestingly, and they made a movie, by the way, about the Wonder Woman's creator and the story about kind of the interesting love story behind it. But of course, a lot of people know Gal Gadot just played Wonder Woman in the DC universe, and a lot of people think she did a really great job at portraying that character. At least the first movie, I think, did very well and was got kind of critical acclaim. What's interesting about Linda Carter was Linda Carter is actually not Jewish. She married a Jewish man, and again, this wasn't the point of showing Linda Carter, but what's cool about Linda Carter is that she is when she married somebody who's Jewish, she also raised her kids Jewish. And when the Met Gala had an event where they were showing off, actually, it was supposed to be a Christian style a theme. This was called the Sunday's Best, which was supposed to be Heavenly Bodies, Fashion, and Catholic Imagination. Which, by the way, the great Kabbalist Madonna showed up with this, which whatever. Um, this is what Linda Carter showed up with. This, and again, while she hasn't converted, she did wear this crown, which says "Leolam al tishkach," never forget. That was in 2018, by the way. That's pretty wild. So she wore that. So I thought that was pretty cool that Linda Carter showed up, even though again, and Madonna's never converted to Judaism. By the way, I just not that it matters, but I think Linda Carter's aged far better than Madonna. But that's neither here nor there. But that I mean, she for me, she was the iconic um, superhero during the 70s when the superheroes and 80s when superheroes were not having their biggest moment, definitely not during the Marvel resurgence. But that being said, it doesn't matter because as you know, that's not where the story starts. The story starts, of course, when we talk about comic books. The comic book industry really developed in New York out of pulp fiction and out of graphic stories that a lot of people found in the papers, in the newspapers, right? Of course, in Sundays they were in color, but these comic strips, the transition to turning them into books and turning them into something that kids would end up buying was an interesting it was an interesting cultural shift. And actually, I think this exhibit actually talks about it. I know it does. The new form of comic books actually created congressional hearings because Congress was very worried about what was happening. Well, these two guys are the guys who, to some extent, created what we know of as the modern day comic book hero, which to some extent, yeah, you can have comic books and comic strips, but when we talk about what happens with comics, it is the emergence of superheroes that turn them into something that becomes a force of nature. And in a way, they tell the stories of of society and culture, and they also, I would argue, are the ways that we express myth in the world that we live in today. that when we want to convey those mythological elements that our ancestors would write into heroes, we put those into our comic books. And what's so interesting is because these comic heroes were created by Jews and primarily the children of immigrants and primarily people who lived in Brooklyn and the Bronx who grew up during the Depression, came of age during the Depression, were either young men who were very poor. In most of the cases, were also young men who served in World War II. That certain themes became part of the American myth and became part of our consciousness because of what these people did with comic books. And Superman is where it all starts, and that is with the stories of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, who again, these two guys, who, unlike most of the people, are from they're the children of immigrants. They're actually from Cleveland, and these two guys, Siegel and Schuster, end up creating a character. Initially, their first run at Superman was actually a villain. Was actually somebody who comes from outer space and does and is a scary character. Well, they flipped it to a to making him a hero, and of course, the rest is history. Now, some of the history is a little murky because unfortunately, Siegel and Schuster lost control of Superman. They did not. They ran into legal issues, and actually lost the they lost it. And it's kind of sad because that is a theme in these stories of comic books, is that oftentimes the creators of the characters did not get a lot of credit, and in some cases never made money off of their creations. um and so when we look at this character, which again becomes the iconic, this is Superman #1, and if you have this one, you're a millionaire just because you have this comic book. If you have this one, which was, as you can see, from June of 1938, we have a character who is has a Hebrew name, right? His name is Kal-El, which could be the voice of God. His all the names of the people of Krypton have the name El in them. The question of how consciously Jewish that was is a little bit of an there's a little bit of an argument on that. There's definitely, you can make the argument that several of the elements of this being stories of extraterrestrials who come to this world and who either save us or destroy us, those had already been around. Edgar Rice Burroughs stories, John Carter stories, had already captivated people's imaginations. They didn't come up with that. But a story of a man who comes from another planet, comes from somewhere else, has to hide his identity, but really has, again, this desire to help a world which doesn't really understand him. Many people say that that is a very Jewish idea. That um, looking at the world from this kind of standpoint of the outsider, only Jewish folks could really understand that. Again, you it's not they've never said that. They didn't say that this is why they created it. But this element of Clark Kent having to be the that's the alter ego, right? Alter ego, the disguise that the person puts on is that he's just a normal person. He's an average, ordinary, everyday, fairly Gentile guy with a very Gentile name, but his real name is actually a Hebrew name. So it's an interesting question of how, how Jewish was it supposed to be? How how much their story affected those stories. Um, but this is only the beginning of the superhero comic. Again, Not every comic was a superhero comic. I want to make that clear. I'm not saying that they all were. There were a lot of other comics that were humor comics, that were, the comics that focused on, kind of teen, teen stuff, the Archie comics, things like that. There were other comics throughout history, but the ones that really changed, um, and created a new business were these superhero comics. Um, and one of the big companies after DC started was Marvel. Now, this is the Captain America #1, which is also worth a lot of money. Not as much as the Superman #1, but this is Captain America #1. And you can see the first thing that Captain America does is punch out Hitler. Now, what kind of fantasy is that? That's a Jewish fantasy, right? That's a Jewish fantasy. This is what a Jewish person wants to do. Jewish person wants to knock out Hitler. And here we have a guy, who helps create this type of American, patriotic American character, is also somebody who served in battle. And that is this guy, Jack Kirby. Now, Jack Kirby is the guy we don't talk about in Marvel Comics. He's the one who really created the characters. But this is Jack Kirby, also born as Jacob Kurtzberg. Also, again, this is one of the New York guys. And this guy created so many of the characters that you know and love. And he did it with this guy, his partner. Well, you don't recognize him from this picture because this is one of his wartime pictures, but you know who he is, right? Well, he's this guy, Stan Lee.
The man.
Now look at Stanley there. Would you think that's going to become this guy right here? And unfortunately, of course, as you know, Stanley passed away a few years ago. He had a very long life. He had some health issues towards the end, but he was still acting in Marvel movies. He was doing those famous cameos for the last 20 years. He was popping in his movies, and he popped into all the movies, the Spider-Man movies, the X-Men movies. He was in all of them. He was in every one. He had a little cameo. He would be sitting in a car. He'd be walking down the street. He'd be on a whatever.
That
It was
was
amazing.
that was a big thing. It was almost like Hitchcock.
Yeah.
You always look for where's Stan Lee.
Yeah, and that's Stan Lieber. Stan Lieber. Now again, Stan Lieber, like a lot of people, another one of these New York Jewish kids. Another guy who served during the war. He was in the Signal Corps, like a lot of Jewish guys who were pretty smart, including, by the way, our own Lee Schulman of blessed memory. Making whatever they can of their skills to help the United States. But this guy ended up I want to be very careful how I say this, directing what would become Marvel's powerhouse of superheroes. And he worked with Jack Kirby. Jack Kirby was oftentimes the artist and the kind of the creative mind, where Stan Lee would come up with these crazy ideas, and he'd have Jack create them. And so the X-Men, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, the Avenger, I mean, everything came out of these guys. And it's weird because when they created it, and I remember being a kid, getting comic books, and I had an older cousin who gave me his comic books. He was, 10 or so years older than me. So, I got his Thor comics and the Hulk and all these characters that he created, Doctor Strange. And these characters and these stories that again were such creative stories, and they really were, to me, it was a form of entertainment. It was a form of literature that again, is it highbrow literature? No, but I had no idea that by the time I would be a parent myself, my kids all loved the Avengers and loved all the X-Men movies. And to see the Thor movies, for me to see the characters that I read as a kid being created and made into multi-billion-dollar movies, because again, these movies, you've seen what Spider-Man is doing right now. These are characters that were created by Jewish guys, a lot of them 60 and now 70 years ago, that have generated so much I mean, so much money, but also, have helped create. And again, some people don't like them, and I'm not saying you have to like them, but they've created a whole genre of film and television because there's DC Universe. I was just watching Green Lanterns, the Lanterns that's now on HBO. That's a creation of Marvel of DC Universe, but the Guardians of the Galaxy and all these I mean, there's so many characters that have created their own franchises. It's not like there's a Marvel franchise. There's the Spider-Man franchise and the X-Men franchise. I mean, these are all franchises within the industry that have created billions of dollars in the for film and television.
Right. You can make
Yes.
you can make the argument that these movies that came out of these comic books help secure, if not save, some of the studios in Hollywood
You're absolutely
from
right.
financial ruin.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. The way that this ended up saving Hollywood, and again, like I said, you may not like the movies, they may not be your cup of tea, but I think it's important, as Philip said, the reality is the industries would have maybe perished without these movies, because Hollywood couldn't figure out how to they didn't know how they had lost the formula of making a blockbuster. And so what these movies did is create these franchises for them that, yes, in many ways kept them alive in some cases, these studios. So it's a really interesting situation. There was definitely some friction between Kirby and Stan Lee. Um, Kirby oftentimes felt that, Stan took all the credit and would go out there and you know, everyone knew who he was, and nobody knew who Jack Kirby was. But these guys were. It's difficult to understate how much Stan Lee created in in both his desire to, yeah, again, even if it was a matter of ego, even if this was an exercise of him saying, look at me, look what I've created. it, it- I don't know how to describe it other than this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that, I mean, virtually every character you can think of it, one way or the other, came out of his mind or out of Jack Kirby's mind, right? I mean, everything. Now, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention another creator who was Jewish, or actually two creators who were Jewish, Bob Kane and Bill Finger. Now, this one I would say is a little bit, maybe not as maybe not as Jewish as some of the other characters, but Batman, which was created by Bob Kane, was definitely an important part of the DC universe, and kind of help create a brand for a character and a brand for that really gave DC a lot of credibility, especially as like the Superman stories kind of waxed and waned. And again, the fact that Christopher Nolan picked up the Batman character and created because again, there had already been a franchise built around Batman with Tim Burton and the succeeding versions of it that got sillier and sillier. But again, looking at what Batman did on television in the 60s and 70s, and then what Christopher Nolan was able to do 25 years later, I mean, as much as Christopher Nolan has been a great director, the Batman franchise turned him into a household name and gave him the credibility to go out and be able to do movies like Oppenheimer and The Odyssey. They were critically acclaimed superhero movies that, again, the character was created by by Jewish writers and artists.
Yeah.
So
one thing, I want to go back to the financial thing, Rabbi. The thing about these movies is that they would be franchise movies where you could have multiple films, and then you could spin off other characters from the movies, and Doctor Strange could interact with another Marvel character, and that was something that really you didn't have with one-off movies. Like E.T. was a big movie, but it was just, that was it. There wasn't going to be E.T. 2 or spin-offs or any of the blockbusters.
No, you're right, and so it allows for a business model that is, and I would make the argument it's not just the superheroes, it's the villains, right? Because I mean, people really didn't like, and I didn't even see the follow up to the Joker, but the Joker did very well. The Penguin series that Colin Farrell's doing now is highly acclaimed and is doing very well. So all the Gotham stuff that's been on television over the years, it's difficult to total up how much these characters have made for film and television, but it's literally, as much as the comic books themselves have kind of retreated into kind of the, is it really, I mean, is it really about the comic book or is it about the movie or television series now? The reality is, oh, my daughter just came in and shook her head. Tanner Scott just messed up. So I think people here are following it, honey. Don't worry. He's not happy. My daughter's not happy. Anyways, but
So are we behind or not?
I guess we're behind now? Is that what you're telling me? We lost.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
All right. It was the ninth. Anyways, sorry for ruining people who were taping it. Sure, you can't do that. Anyways, the superhero franchises, as we're saying, and again, big business, but also we really have to say that these characters are the mythology of our day. For people who are, I would say, 60s and 70s, who were raised with comic books and with comic book characters and with television shows like Batman or Superman or any of the many resurgence that we had in the 90s. Because remember, there was a point in time after the Batman television series
Don't be sorry.
that these became not popular, right? These forms of comic books became less popular. Comic characters became less popular, but the mythology, the stories behind and the characters behind them have always been, I think, compellingly Jewish mythology, in the sense that, as we have talked about on Tuesdays, none of our biblical characters are without flaws. All of the characters that these people created have flaws. All of the comic book characters have flaws. They're anxious. They have feelings of guilt. They are not sure how to tell people who they are. All of these kinds of character traits that we see are oftentimes very human, and they're in some cases, the neuroses seem very Jewish too. Whether or not, again, any character that sees themselves as an outsider because of their powers or because of who they are is in essence one of the things that we've dealt with as Jews, especially in this country, is, are we accepted? Are we celebrated? Do people turn on us? Because in a lot of the comic book movies and I mean, it's in the comic books themselves, but in the movies and the television shows that maybe you've seen, oftentimes the heroes are heroes, but all of a sudden they screw up or somebody starts, the villains start to uh, use the media or create falsehoods where these comic book heroes are actually the heroes, the superheroes actually is actually a bad person, that the crowd will turn on them, right? So all of a sudden, like everyone hates the superheroes, everyone wants to kill the superheroes. There's a theory that like the whole X-Men universe, and especially again, the X-Men is one of those examples where we actually have a Jewish character, Magneto, who's a Holocaust survivor. Sometimes this stuff is very apparent, which is the X-Men are mutants, and people sometimes want to destroy all of them because they have a gene which makes them different. And Magneto becomes the leader of the mutants, who refuses to try to get along with the humans and says, "Let's just do away with them." Um, but he's a Jewish character in the strips, and by the way, in the movies, in the X-Men movies, they show Magneto in a concentration camp as a child, uh, which also then gets us to this issue of like, are there actual Jewish comic book heroes, superheroes, or villains? For the most part, the villains were not portrayed as being Jewish. There are a few Jewish superhero characters, and one of those superheroes slash villains, because he starts out in some of the versions as a hero and then becomes a villain, is Magneto. And then he oftentimes comes back and is a hero again, depending on whether he wants to help humans or not, whether his hatred of humans is overwhelming. By the way, in the movies, in the X-Men movies, he's portrayed by a German actor, Michael Fassbender, but he's a Jewish character. Does anybody else know one of the main Jewish comic book characters? I think Philip probably knows. He knows a lot of comic book history. Do you know one of the Jewish comic book superheroes?
Yeah. The Thing,
Yeah, Ben Grimm.
Ben Grimm.
Ben
Yeah.
Grimm, who is the Thing in the Fantastic Four, his backstory is actually he's Jewish. Um, so not usually portrayed by Jewish actors, but again, for those who aren't sure what we're talking about, it's this guy. It's this guy. This is the Thing. The Thing gets turned into a rock person who unfortunately can never go back to looking like a human being. This is one of the Fantastic Four versions of the Thing. So, but yeah, that's one of the Jewish characters. Anybody know any of the other Jewish comic book characters? That a couple of them have been portrayed already. Actually, one of them was just portrayed in uh, the comics, and it actually got some grief. Anybody know? Well, I'm going to actually give you a little bit of a clue. This is a character who was actually portrayed by a Israeli actress. This is an Israeli superhero. Anybody know? Anybody? This is not a um, very well known character, but Shira Haas in the Brave New World, Captain America: Brave New World, plays this character who's actually Israeli. And some people were like, is there any way that this kind of character is going to be able to find a way of being in a movie? This is Sabra. Yep. So this character has actually has made a debut in the Marvel universe. A lot of people thought it wasn't going to make it because it was so problematic to have an Israeli superhero. But yes, Sabra is not only a Jewish superhero but an Israeli superhero. There's uh there's another one. There's another Jewish superhero, female. Well, actually, there's another male one. Does anyone know any of the other male ones, which has made it into the movies now too? Anybody? This one, they only, I don't even know if they're coming out. I don't know if they're coming out with the second season of this, but this made it into the Marvel universe just, I think, a year ago. This is Moon Knight. It was portrayed by Oscar Isaac. And this is what he looks like when he's Moon Knight. Let me just show you a picture of what Moon Knight looks like. That's Moon Knight. Not a super well-known Marvel character, but he is actually the manifestation of an Egyptian god, which is kind of interesting. Because how does a Jew become an Egyptian god? So it's a weird concept. And of course, again, some people said it's a Latino who becomes a Caucasian Jewish man, who's also the manifestation of an ancient Egyptian god. Anyways, that's another one of the Jewish characters. Yeah.
I've always thought of the Hulk as sort of a golem. Remember we talked about the golem when we were in Europe? Because the Hulk, he doesn't start out as the Hulk, he becomes the Hulk, and then he's uncontrollable. You can't really tame him. They do in later movies, but the original Hulk character was just, he was just wild. You couldn't channel his
Yeah, but
strength.
I've always said that the Hulk is really a modern day Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? That's really the guy, who injects himself or makes himself, wants to have that power, but then can't control it. I always thought it was more of a Jekyll and Hyde type of situation. But yeah, I guess, there is that uncontrollable, now he's uncontrollable. There is another character who makes who's in some of the movies of the X-Men, is not one of the main X-Men characters, but she does have the ability to do some pretty cool things in the X-Men stories, and she is Jewish as well, and that's this woman, Kitty Pryde. So Kitty Pryde has the ability to go through, as you can see, she can pass through solid matter. So that's what she can do. And she is, according to the backstory, she is Jewish as well. As, again, she's Ashkenazi Jewish American, and her grandfather was held in a concentration camp. So that's part of her backstory. And again, she is another one of those Jewish characters. Again, not necessarily the most famous, but it is important to know that there are characters that have Jewish backstories in these. Most of the characters that these Jewish guys created were not Jewish, but again, some people would say that they are, that they were maybe all Jewish because they're hiding their identity and they're pretending that they're somebody that they're not. Interestingly, by the way, you know who played Kitty Pryde in the first versions of the X-Men? Does anybody know? It's only interesting for people who go to the movies a lot and are interested by these kind of characters. I'll show you. This not necessarily relevant, but this is Kitty Pryde in the X-Men movies, in the movies. That is, hello, Elliot Page, who you just saw in the Odyssey. Anyways, yeah, that was Kitty Pryde. Not that necessarily has any relevance, but Kitty Pryde was in the movies. So those are some of the Jewish characters that superheroes that they sometimes worked into the stories. Oftentimes there was some kind of connection to the Holocaust, which I always thought was kind of interesting because it kind of like explains that kind of, coming out of that darkness, coming out of that horrible experience, that they're going to use their powers to protect people from another Holocaust happening. And again, it goes all the way back to that image that I showed you, that goes back to the beginning of the in the 30s, which is the fact that these are oftentimes fantasies for this kind of thing, punching Hitler in the face. So this this is what the superheroes could do. And so again, whether or not the characters are always Jewish, the people who wrote these stories were. And again, there were oftentimes people like this who, like Stan Lee, who, wanted to do something to help destroy the Nazis, whatever they could do. And sometimes it was writing stories. And some of these guys, by the way, I should point out, helped America, because what they did is they wrote comic books about the military. This is one of those guys, and we're going to talk about him now. This is one of the most important people in the creation of graphic novels. Some would say he's one of the parents of graphic novels, and that is Will Eisner. Will Eisner becomes a champion for telling stories that are not easy stories. These are not for children, these stories. And Will Eisner was from the same background as Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. He was a child of the Depression. And Will Eisner, have you heard of? I mean, have people heard of Will Eisner? I mean,
No.
I probably am now. I'm probably going to say some stuff about this guy who, again, you can make the argument. He started out in the comic book genre. He started out. This was his creation, the Spirit. And he started out working in kind of this is his character that he created, who doesn't have the kinds of powers that, Superman has, or he's more of a Batman character. But he created this character because he really thought that the stories could be a little grittier. And you could make the argument that by creating these characters, he kind of introduced the types of versions of superhero stories like Batman, like the Batman that Christopher Nolan did, that is, got a pretty dark spin on some of the, that, like, how close is the Batman from just becoming, an all-out terror, if you will. He's a vigilante, he's helping people, but like there's a darkness to him. So he helped kind of introduce that into the storylines. But what he did, which was for him, and again, this is a guy who during the war and really more in during Korea, created these types of this is Will Eisner's work, manuals and work for the military. But he decided after the war to work, at making comics something that would be taken seriously by adults as a way of telling stories.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, is graphic novel the same as a comic, or is there a difference? When you use graphic novel, is it interchangeable?
I think what people how they differentiate it is that they really saw the graphic novel as kind of a closer attempt at creating literature than just the art. Oh, I'm not going to show you that one first. I don't want to show you that one first. his most famous graphic novel, which he created in the 70s. And again, this was not the early forms of of comics. This was not the first. This was not the first. These were not popular at first. This is called A Contract with God and Other Tenement Stories, and it's a series of stories that he tells about what life was like on the Lower East Side. And these are tough. These are really not for kids. These are stories that include things like rape and people having to make really dark decisions. Um, and this one in particular is very, very Jewish. It is a reflection to some extent on Will Eisner's own background, where he grew up in poverty. His father was an artist. His mother didn't want him to get into art, wanted him to have a normal kind of job, and he gravitated towards art, started doing these illustrations. If you hear his story, he's talked about his story. He actually almost went down the dark road, if you will, the way he says it. He almost started working on what they used to call Tijuana Bibles, which were early, almost, I wouldn't say it was porn comics, but they were definitely adult and not for kid comics. But he didn't do it. He wanted to not become a comic artist and writer that would be associated with that. So he tried to tell adult stories, and he was successful at really creating stories that became popular. That he found a way to create a type of art and a type of media that today is responsible for its own impact within the media. And by that I mean some of these graphic novels have been turned into movies and television, and they're not comic strips. So these are books. I mean, these are longer stories. I mean, I have a couple of them. I have a couple of Jewish ones. Um, Actually, this is one of the Jewish ones that came out not too long ago. It's called, and again, it's about 100 pages. It's called The Adventures of Rabbi Harvey, a graphic novel of Jewish wisdom and wit in the Wild West. So it's character, it's kind of like a Frisco Kid character, about a rabbi who travels out west and becomes a teacher, and kind of becomes a there's stories of that are very Jewish stories. Um, there are people who've also created characters. I've been showing this off for Tuesdays. This is the R. Crumb Genesis, which is not a graphic novel per se, but he tried to turn the Bible into a graphic novel. And this is, I want to say it's about 200 pages. It's quite amazing. And as I pointed out, for those who are Tuesdays know I said it, it says right here, adult supervision recommended for minors. It's the only Bible, and it is, because they're depicting some of the stories in the Bible that are not for kids. It's the only Bible I've ever seen without warning on it. Adult supervision recommended for minors. The first book of the Bible graphically depicted, nothing left out. So he kind of created R. Crumb is not Jewish, but definitely was influenced by people like Will Eisner and these guys who would tell stories that were not easy stories. But the interesting thing about Will Eisner that I think is fascinating is not only did he create this, or help pioneer this form, of graphic storytelling that was serious, a serious. Not that comic books are not serious; they are. I mean, obviously, I love them, and I think that they have wonderful mythology and they're wonderful stories and they're entertaining and everything else. But creating literature that has a graphic element, that's what Eisner was trying to do. And he did it in a very Jewish way and with very Jewish characters. And he passed away 20 years ago. And this this book, A Contract with God, is still considered one of the most important works of fictional, a fictional depiction of what life was like for people in the tenements, for Jews in the tenements in particular. And so it's a very powerful book. It's theological. It's, as you can hear, the, the title, A Contract with God, but it's very powerful. Um, and that didn't stop there. Well, I'm going to show you this one he did. This one was called Fagin the Jew. And he created this because he felt that Charles Dickens was essentially created an anti-Semitic character.
You just muted.
Yeah, I did. I was just telling them I need
Oh,
my
I'm
door.
sorry.
I
Okay.
need my door closed. No, I did it on purpose. I just need my door closed now. But he created Fagin the Jew, where he tried to he didn't whitewash Fagin. This, I'm talking about the character from Oliver Twist, right? From Oliver. You know him from Oliver, from the musical and the movie, but from the Dickens story, where he's Jewish, and he's more Jewish in the book than he is in the movies. They kind of were a little, I guess, more sensitive to that. But Will Eisner just felt, hey, Dickens got away with creating an anti-Semitic character, and no one's ever taken him up on it. Like, no one's ever said, hey, that's not right. So he tried to rehumanize, if you will, Fagin, very Jewish, uh, a very it's kind of a way for a Jewish author to kind of rehabilitate a Jewish character. It's pretty wild. And then just before he died, he did something that's really amazing. He did this. This is his last graphic novel. It's called The Plot, The Secret Story of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And he wrote this, created this, um, and just literally came out in 2005, just before he died. And the reason that he did this, does anybody know? Well, I hope all of you know what the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is, right? It was a anti-Semitic hoax, a forgery that came out in the early 1900s, which the goal of which was to basically say that Jews were secretly running the world, and it was purported to be, the bylaws, the agreements of how the Jews do this, right? So um, this was created by Russian anti-Semites who created this as a way to, you know, uh, kind of manufacture, anti-Semitic uh, hysteria by creating this Jewish threat to the world, right? So what happened is, by the way, this is still sold on the streets in Europe I mean, you can buy it here, the protocols, but it's sold all over all over the Arab world. And when Will Eisner saw that the Egyptians had turned um, the protocols into basically a radio show without, any kind of warning that this was a forgery or a false thing. Radio Islam in Egypt was broadcasting this. He said, I got to do something about it. And so he created this story, this graphic story of how this was created, the story of how this was created as an anti-Semitic hoax. So Will Eisner wasn't just writing Jewish stories. He wasn't. He didn't just pioneer. He didn't just pioneer a new form of media, folks. He used his art form to defend and protect the Jewish people, which I think is a pretty significant thing. Because when we've talked about Jews in the media, when we've talked about people who have had an impact on our world, I think we have to give special credit to the people who also have not only helped create these forms of art, but have used them to tell Jewish stories, significant Jewish stories, and in some cases to protect the Jewish people. And he's one of those. So that's why I wanted you to know a little bit about Will Eisner. I want you to know a little bit about who this guy is. But arguably, I didn't pull it out, but I'm going to show it you in a second. You cannot talk about the graphic novel without talking about one that also was very Jewish. Very Jewish. And that is, we could say, this is where we get to, this is where we're coming to. And that is this guy right here. Art Spiegelman and Mouse. Now there's Mouse back there, cover. Mouse has become, I don't know if it's still, but it used to be the most successful graphic novel of all time. And there was two, there was Mouse 1 and Mouse 2. And it became a huge best-selling graphic novel. It won a Pulitzer Prize. And it was actually the first graphic novel to win a Pulitzer Prize. And it originally was serialized and then turned into this, the first version, the first volume, and then a second volume as well. This is Art Spiegelman's personal story. This is his father's story. And you can see originally it was published in Raw, which was a comics anthology that Art Spiegelman had created. And when he kind of pulled together and created this volume, which you can see is 296 pages, right? So when we talk about like what's a graphic novel is in some cases hundreds of pages. And again, Mouse 2 is called And Here My Troubles Began. Has anyone read Mouse? Has anyone
No.
anybody here?
I bought a bunch of copies when they were banning it all over the place. It was on the banned books list for a lot of different
Yeah.
districts. So I bought several of them and I have them. I just haven't read it yet. But I have both
Yeah.
volumes and I think I bought like 5 of each or something.
I've read part 1 in high school.
Yeah, it is.
I never read
it
it.
is-
I'm going to though. I have
It
it.
is very, very dark. It is one of those works of the Holocaust that it just hits you in the teeth. It doesn't pull punches, and it's tough to read. I mean, I had a tough time reading it when I read it for the first time. I think in college. I I mean, I cried. I couldn't read it all at first. I mean, it's not that long. But I couldn't. I had to read it in pieces because I couldn't. And it was already. I bought it in the one volume. It wasn't like I was reading it when it was serialized. But it was. What's so hard to read about it is that this is not only is it true, and we know the stories that survivors told. And again, the subtitle of this is "My Father Bleeds History." Um, what Mouse conveys more powerfully than maybe any other graphic novel, movie, television show that you've ever seen, the generational trauma of the Holocaust. Because as much as it's about his father, it's really about him. And it's about what it's like to be the child of a Holocaust survivor. His mother committed suicide when he was 20. And his father burned all of her stories.
His mother was a Holocaust survivor as well.
Uh-huh. She survived Auschwitz. I'm going to show you one of the frames just so you understand what I'm talking about here. This is his dad talking to him. Friends, your friends. If you lock them together in a room with no food for a week, then you could see what it is, friends. That's a conversation that he really had with his father. I mean, as a kid, hearing that, yeah, I mean, it hadn't been so powerfully put in media in my life. For the first time in my life, it just hit me with it. And maybe I was still young. It was a comic book. I don't know. It was serialized or a graphic novel. Um, I still like. I mean, I still thinking about it today. How hard it was to read that, and thinking about me if I was a kid and had, a parent who was telling me those kind of stories and telling me these kind of things. I mean, you just realize that again, generational trauma it's another one of those things that, like, how do you get restitution for that? How do you make reparations? How do you know, where's the justice for that? For telling for talking to a kid like that. And you can't blame the dad. The dad's psychologically traumatized. I mean, you wish he hadn't said something like that, but what do you do? I mean, so uh um
Why
so
why was
now
it called Mouse?
um that's a good question. So um in the in the comic strip, the way that he I'll actually show you. You can't see it so much in these ones, but uh in the let me see if I can find a frame that you'll see it clearly. The 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 Nazis are cats and the Jews are mice.
Okay.
Not
So
not fair to cats.
it's anti-cat.
Yeah, I'm pro cat. We
Just
have
see,
a
let me see
cat.
if I
She's a
have
sweet.
let me see if I have a picture of it. Okay, maybe it's not fair to cats, but come on. Uh
Could you make them German shepherds? That would be.
uh yeah, I hear you, but I don't know. If you're anyways, so they're obviously it's a predator, but I don't know. Maybe because the Nazis like, or Hitler at least liked dogs. I don't know. But the Americans are the dogs in Mouse. But anyways, um, it's not it's not an easy thing. Yes, I guess if you're a cat lover to see it, but it's one of those things too where we've seen Jews as mice before, right? We saw it in American Tail with Fievel Mousekewitz, right? Which is, the Spielberg animated story of, of a Jewish immigrant, which is not comic books. It's actually was an animated movie, but we've seen Jews as mice, depicted as mice, um, which to some extent, kind of portrays and gives us that vulnerability of, people are trying to get rid of us. They treat us as vermin, all those kinds of things. But again, that there's these predators, like everyone is a predator. Everybody is going to attack us. So there's definitely, when everyone's an animal, it's a little different because in the mouse in the mouse novels, everyone's an animal. So it's not like, the animal, the person's, the Jews are animals and everyone else is a human being, or there are human beings. In this, there's all animals. So, but yeah, it's very tough. It's a very tough graphic novel to 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 deal with, and um, as Robin said, it's been banned, and it's been banned for some of the same reasons that um, Holocaust related books have been banned, because some people feel that it's too troubling, that it's it creates bad images for people to think about, all these kinds of weird arguments that are made for why, Holocaust related things. And that goes, by the way, that some school districts have eliminated the Diary of Anne Frank
Yep.
out of their libraries and out of their curriculum. um but yeah, it's an interesting situation where, you know as much as more and more Jewish literature is has been embraced by some schools, there's also this wave of trying to purge the Holocaust out of or at least Holocaust literature, where, maybe there'll be less for people to digest from the Holocaust. Um, but I would definitely, if people want to understand um, what graphic novels are, Mouse is definitely one of the I think one of the most powerful um, ways to kind of introduce yourself to this genre. Um, it's, again, it's like a comic book, in the style that it is, but it's also it's much more of literature. It's something that you might read over. A comic book was great because you'd sit down and you would read it all in one sitting. But these are in some cases books that, it'll take. I mean, this isn't super hard to. I mean, this is 100 pages. This, you could probably knock this out in one sitting, but there are stories in this. Like, you don't have to read the this Adventures of Rabbi Harvey. There's 10 stories in here, so you could read. These are like 10 page. Each story is like 10 pages. So, um, you know, that's and they've done a few. There's a few volumes of the Rabbi Harvey series. But this is not tough litter. This is not Mouse by any stretch of the imagination. It's not a hard read, and it's not and by hard read I mean like a kick in the gut. So these are ways for you to kind of familiarize yourself with this. And so, look, today I hope I kind of introduced you to not the most obvious ways of looking at Jewish contributions to the media. But again, I would have done this whether the Skirball was doing an exhibit or not. I know, Robin, you jumped in a little late, but we talked about the fact that the Skirball through February of 27 is going to be continuing their their exhibit on Comic Book Revolution. So again, there's a lot of stuff that I covered here today that is not in this exhibit, but I definitely recommend, like if you're going to go to the Skirball anyways, definitely pop in and see what they've got in here as far as the collection. Again, it's one of those exhibits where I also would say, like when I go to a museum, I want to like see some original stuff too. And I don't want to just see like pictures on a wall. I want to see the original piece of this. I want to see it like a treasure. So, again, I don't think it's full of treasures, but it's a good story. But I also think like we just covered a lot more ground than we had here. And again, I want to stress, I think this is definitely one of the more important forms of media over the last 60, 70 years. And I would argue that in the last 20 years, as Philip has said too, it saved Hollywood. These characters and this form of storytelling save characters. And I will say that a lot of the Hollywood versions of these comic book stories don't necessarily convey the style of a graphic novel or a comic book. And that goes for some of the other graphic novels like The Watchmen and 300, which was originally a graphic novel that was obviously turned into the movie. Very rarely do the directors even attempt um, to convey that style, that comic book style. It's been done. Sin City, they did it with the Sin City movies where they tried to convey that style, but it doesn't do very well usually, and it's because you're trying to translate one media into another, and you're working in a different media. You just got to do it. It's like when people try to do radio on television and they realized doing what we did on the radio is not going to work. We're now in a visual medium, and the same thing happens when you're taking a comic book and then putting it into a movie. The most successful versions of that have really really departed from trying to give you the comic book feel of the visuals and the narrative style of a comic book. So the 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 exceptions that prove that rule are have to be done in such a way that they're campy or they're silly, like obviously like the 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 Adam West Batman, the Batman television show, which did try to convey the comic book style and feel and the images and the pow, the wop, all the hitting and stuff where they would put that on. Uh, that's the exception, and for the most part, people have not. They don't even try. They don't even try to do.
Rabbi,
Yes.
Disney, Walt Disney Company bought Marvel Entertainment for $4 billion on December 31st, 2009.
And it was a steal.
It was a steal, but 4 billion. I mean, think about what these two guys created.
Yeah. And I don't think by that point, I don't think Stanley got very much of that money, which bothered him. But look, what is he going to do? It ended up becoming a much bigger business than he could have ever imagined. I mean, in reality. But what's interesting about what happened with Marvel Studios by that point is that the guy the guy who is responsible for really creating Marvel. And this isn't, by the way, this isn't a Marvel. This isn't. There's none of this has to do with the actual form of the media. Was this guy right here? It was Avi Arad, who happens to be Israeli, and he was the guy who took Marvel Entertainment uh, and Marvel Studios. And by the way, himself the son of Holocaust survivors, but he was born in Israel, became one of the most successful um, Hollywood executives. Sorry, I'm trying to get this off here right now. Um, and he again he he ended up creating a studio that's what sold. And so Avi Arad is a multi-billionaire now, or multi-millionaire, hundreds of millions of dollars that he made personally out of that deal. So I think, yeah, as you can see, he's also come out pretty strong on Israel. Um, yeah. So this is an interesting guy who wasn't necessarily going to mention him, but since you brought it up again, Philip, about what Marvel Studios ended up becoming, Marvel Entertainment, this is the guy. This is Avi Arad. So again, I mean, thank you actually for reminding me to share that, even though that's really I'd have it's more of what we talked about the last few weeks, which was the film and television stuff. Because Avi Arad didn't, he created no character, he created no superhero, but he did create a multi-billion-dollar business, which ended up is now, going up and down. And again, I think it's safe to say, I could be wrong. You never know. I don't want to say that it's over, but I think we might have seen the boom era of the golden era of superhero movies, and some people would say good riddance. But but I but again, it was the characters were created by Jews. The studio itself was then brought into there, and again, Avi Arad and the people who made the movies wanted to put Stan Lee in as kind of a tribute to the guy who created this all. And again, when we talk about Siegel and Schuster, when we talk about Kane, when we talk about Jack Kirby, got to mention Jack Kirby. Every time someone mentions Stan Lee or Siegel and Schuster and doesn't mention Jack Kirby, it's a disservice to another one of the great Jewish pioneers and again, an oversight that shouldn't be ever allowed to happen, because Jack Kirby was the guy who actually made these people come to life. And these were, again, maybe no other industry in the media, in American media, has been completely created by Jews. And again, going into the graphic novels as well. So thank you, everybody,
one
for
last
being a
thing.
part of that. Yes, sorry, Phil.
Dolly Parton, someone who really helped her on the way to succeed was Sandy Gallen.
Sandy Gallen, yeah.
Yeah.
I will say Dolly Parton got in trouble about 20 years ago for basically saying that she wanted to develop a TV show about a gospel singer, and she basically said Jews in Hollywood didn't let it happen because they don't want Christian stories to be told. Not only was she not correct, she apologized for it, by the way. She did apologize for making those comments, but it's kind of one of those comments that, like, you don't want to hear somebody who's so beloved, and she was.
But she and Sandy shared an apartment in New York City.
I know.
I mean,
I know.
That's even That's even
I know.
crazier.
She definitely had Jewish friends. I'm not saying that, and she did apologize for the comment, but it was really like when she said it, people were cringing, and they were like, "Please, like we don't need to have that reinforced, especially by an American icon." So again, she apologized. She came out and said she realized she shouldn't have said it, and I don't remember what her apology was, but yeah, overall she was a beloved American icon, and she did not have a great moment, but she did apologize, which is another lesson for us during
You
this
can
time.
add that to your next sermon on apologies.
Yeah, I think so few people know. I don't want to dirt Dolly now, by the way. I didn't mean to, and I wasn't going
No.
to necessarily even bring her up. But it was an example of I think of a sincere apology, and it wasn't like she ever said anything like that again. If I was going to talk about weird apologies in Hollywood, and I'm not going to use this one, it's the weird full page Kanye West apology that happened this year. And basically where he said he's gone back on his meds and he's not anti-Semitic anymore.
Two things. One, Rabbi, you reminded me a couple of years ago about when we were in Israel and we were at the airport leaving, getting ready to board the plane to come home. The music system was playing Kanye. Remember that?
Yeah.
You remember that? Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah.
We're waiting. We're in that waiting area by the place where they sell coffee, and they're playing
Yeah.
Kanye.
Yeah, no,
And
that was that was it. Oh, Elise, by the way, I always wanted just before we started that the Atlantic has a half-hour weekly TV show on PBS called Washington Week, and she said Gordon and I usually find it interesting. Elise and I were writing back and forth about the Atlantic. Philip sent me an article from the Atlantic. The Atlantic has become my favorite magazine now. It really, like every issue has a really interesting article for us as Jews to pay attention to. And this last one had a very interesting article that Philip sent me. And again, I usually catch it through. You can look at the Atlantic, by the way, if you have news through Apple, you can get it for free. You can get the Atlantic for free. Is an article about the Jews who supported Hitler. There were Jews who, when Hitler first came to power, said, he's okay. We know that the anti-Semitism is a problem, but eventually he'll give up on the anti-Semitism. He didn't. He didn't give up on the anti-Semitism. So it's an interesting cautionary tale for us today, for those who are making apologies for some of the politicians out there that maybe we shouldn't take them at their word, or we should discount the anti-Semitism that we hear from these politicians. So yes, it's a good cautionary tale. So thank you, Philip, for that. Thank you, Elise, for
Oh, you're
reminding
welcome.
us
Thank you
of
for
that.
doing these classes.
one
Yeah,
last thing about Dolly. TMZ reported about Dolly Parton that had she not given away all the money that she gave away to charity, she would have been a billionaire. So that to me means she must have given over $500 million to charity.
Well, she did. I mean, she gave away a lot of money, and as you saw, she supported her family because they all worked, security for her and sold merchandise, and she kept her very large family employed. So yeah, she had a very big impact on Tennessee and rural parts of Tennessee. And actually, if you might have read this when you were reading some of the stories about Dolly Parton. She created a literacy program where she sent out books to rural families, and that actually inspired PJ Library, which actually this is now a part of PJ Library. PJ Library, Harold Grinspoon, a Jewish philanthropist, was inspired by what Dolly did and started a Jewish version of sending books out to Jewish families to make sure that they had Jewish books. So she actually, it was one of the things that she did, which even though she didn't necessarily do it for the Jewish community, ended up having a really nice impact on the Jewish community because PJ Library has been I think, one of the biggest successes of the Jewish. We oftentimes talk about what doesn't work in the Jewish community. PJ Library has worked. Birthright has worked. There are certain things that we need to also recognize as being good, successful Jewish things, and PJ Library is one of them. And in a weird way, it was inspired by Dolly Parton. So come back, and now we've not just only pointed out some of the a problem, but also salute Dolly for her impact on the country. So again, we will see you next week. We're moving into we've been talking about the media the last few weeks, and then next week we're going to move out of that into some other interesting topics. I don't even want to tell you. You have to come back next week. You have to come back.
Not even a
next week.
hint?
I can't. If I hint it out, I'll just tell you, you're all going to want to be here for it.
Okay.
You're all going to want to be here for it. It's the biggest thing you can talk about, and that's all I'm going to say. And that's all I'm going to say about that. All right.
AI.
Folks. No. This is very real.
Bigger
real.
than AI. Okay.
Oh yeah, no, this is bigger than it's been bigger than AI because it's been bigger than AI since the beginning of human history. All right, everybody. Take
Good
care.
night.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you
Good
very
night.
much.
Thank
Thank
Bye.
you.